Hey guys, it's me again, Krista. This is the third installment of today's video, which is on DMing or dungeon mastering for family groups or for kids. So previously I talked off of a list of bullet points that I made up here to keep myself on topic, and I talked about some of the differences in running a kid-based campaign from your typical adult-based Dungeons and Dragons game, and some of the things that I have found useful in maintaining order and kind of playing to the strengths of a kid-based group, because there are many strengths and a lot of fun can come from involving kids in this game. So I'm about done with my little list here. I had 5 main points and I have just 2 more to go, so just bear with me here as I get this finished up. And these are basically the thoughts of a first-time DM. So no, I haven't had a lot of experience DMing, and this is my first time ever DMing, not only just for a family group, but overall. So perhaps you yourselves have had more experience than me, but I still thought that I may have some insights worthy of sharing with the greater public. So here we go. First of all, I talked about creativity, which is amazing in kids playing this game. So that's definitely something they will surprise you, and those surprises are oftentimes more exciting than your actual campaign to you, because of course you know the campaign, you know how it's supposed to go, but what surprises you is the things that the kids do and say. It can be just hilarious, but you have to be open to spontaneity. You can't be expecting them to just go methodically through the adventure as an adult, especially an experienced adult may do. No, that doesn't seem to be the way kids play this game, and I'm glad of it because it's a lot more fun the way that they actually do play. So, point number 2 that I had talked about was that waiting for turns can be a challenge in a kid-based group, because kids do not have the longest attention span when it comes for waiting for others to roll their die and make their move and complete their actions and so on. So what I found that you want to do is make encounters personal. If they cannot involve the characters themselves, then they should involve their close friends in the campaign. That way it keeps them at the table. It keeps them from wandering away, going to play a video game, getting out their toys to play with, or just generally talking and making a disruption that creates trouble for other characters who are trying to play and take their turns. Point number 3 relates to that. I have found that NPCs in a kid-based campaign should be quirky, fun, and memorable. They don't even necessarily have to be, super helpful to completing a quest, although of course they should each have their pearls of wisdom that they can sprinkle throughout your campaign if the party is having trouble. But most importantly, they should hold your interest. They should be characters that are going to be fun for the kids, not necessarily because they themselves are jokesters, but because they're kind of like caricatures, because something about them is amusing. They should have a lightness to them that makes them enjoyable to interact with, rather than those really heavy philosophical type characters that you may want to involve in an adult-based campaign. Depending on the ages of the kids, a lot of that may not really be of their interest. If you want to involve some kind of philosophical debates, they're probably not going to really pick up on that. But if you make characters that are quirky, that are oddball, they're going to just love to interact with them. And that is important. I've found that those characters that they love to interact with and have a bond with are of the most important thing in the campaign, because it keeps them interested in the entire adventure. So that was my third point here, which I had talked about, was how to create characters that your players will have personal attachments to. When I say characters, of course, I'm referring to NPCs that you are going to play. Now, of course, they can also develop personal attachments to the other player characters, but I'm talking about now things that are more in your control, and the thing most in your control are the folks that you create and kind of plant in your world to be of interest to your players. So let's see here. We're going to move on to number 4, which is the making of friends. Now, my experience as a player in Dungeons and Dragons, playing mostly with groups of older guys, has been that most people play Dungeons and Dragons to kill stuff. They don't necessarily want to talk. They don't necessarily want to make friends. In fact, if you try to make friends during many of these games, you'll be made fun of by the other players who are like, okay, when am I going to get to kill it? So it seems very different in a kid-based game. At least that's been my experience with this kid-based game. The boys that play our game are definitely just as interested in making friends with strange and memorable folks of other races as they are in attacking, getting loot, and so on. So what you want to do with that is create different kinds of beings in your world that will evoke curiosity. Have them behave in quirky, unusual ways that will kind of intrigue them, like, that guy is some kind of a fish man. Who is he? Let's talk to him. Or, you know, meeting the myconids, the mushroom folk. Like, wow, make strange voices that they will have, and try to characterize how they act, how they think differently from them. And I find that this is kind of a learning experience. It's almost, you know, teaching them to value other cultures and to form friendships with diverse folks. So, you know, without trying to throw too much of this heavy educational spin on it, I find that there is a lot of good to be found in making interesting characters and having them be a part of the campaign, having diplomacy as a key focus of the campaign, because as they adventure along, they're going to encounter all kinds of folks, and it can't be that every kind of person that they encounter is going to try to murder them, because it's not very realistic anyway, and it really does get kind of, you know, old for everybody, probably the players as well, and certainly for the DM. So that is great. I find that non-aggressive encounters really are very well received by kids, perhaps more so than adults. Now, granted, I haven't yet had the privilege of DMing an adult-based campaign, but if I did, I would let you know if I found that diplomacy was something that they enjoyed as well, because it's certainly what I would prefer. And I'm really glad that that kids really like to make friends with different kinds of beings. Again, I think it helps to make them strange, though. Strange kinds of beings. You know, like I have these mole men called talpids, and they were really well received. I have some locathas, like fish folk, and they were really well received. You know, but if you have just like your average Joe Schmo walking around, they may not be like super excited to befriend him. So make them weird, and the kids will be like, wow, let's talk to that guy. And I love that. So my final point here on DMing with kids is about disruptions. Now, as of course you're probably aware if you have kids, if you work with kids, if you're around kids at all, is that kids are somewhat hyper in general, and they may create disruptions, particularly when they're waiting for their turn, because as we've discussed, that's something that's a little bit foreign to kids. With today's instant gratification and video games which they play, which focus on their character the entire time, and all of the things in their world which really teach them, you know, that waiting is something not to be tolerated, it can be very difficult for them to wait their turn. So there may be a problem with disruptions. Here's what I have found to be most useful. First of all, hand raising. If they want to say something to me as the dungeon master and have me involved with whatever that they're going to say that their character does and such, they will have to raise their hand and say Dungeon Master. They will have to say it only one time, because what initially happened when we were playing is that all the kids in unison would go, Krista, 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 like pretty much ceaselessly, because they would always want to say what they thought in the midst of our game. You know, I bring out some kind of character and, oh, Krista, 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 I'd be like, whoa, alright, I gotta think here. I have to think what this character is doing and how it's gonna react to you, and is it gonna fight you? Is it going to diplomacize? Like, what's happening? So, hand raise, Dungeon Master, is what is necessary to be acknowledged. That has helped tremendously. Also, using the terms. Oops, sorry about that. My memory card decided that I was done making these videos, but I wasn't quite finished yet. So, we're very close though to the last bit of my 5-point list. So, I was saying about how when a person in our game wants to get my attention, they have to raise their hand and they have to say Dungeon Master. The reason that I have decided that they have to say Dungeon Master is because I feel it does put a certain level of distance between me and them, as far as seeing me as an authority figure rather than, you know, Krista who just hangs out sometimes. Because it is important to have some distance so that they just don't keep talking to me throughout the game. So I found that to really work well during game time for them to call me just Dungeon Master. And the last point I wanted to mention is about rivalry and fighting during the game, as far as players fighting with one another about, for instance, loot. They tend to really fight about which character should get to have the loot. And let's face it, those of us who play Dungeons and Dragons as adults, we may have the same kinds of problems in our groups, especially if we're playing with folks who aren't necessarily, our very best friends. I know that, in our games, there's always some fighting about loot because we want what we want, right? So, what I've found to be useful in this particular game with the kids to keep them from fighting over who deserves it the most, who can use it the best, etc. This is actually something my husband Chris came up with, so I gotta give him credit for that or he'll yell at me, is I will have everybody roll, and whoever gets the highest roll gets that loot. Of course, not everybody wants each item, so you don't have to, place a bid for it, as it were, unless you want it. So that keeps people relatively peaceful about the loot situation and keeps the fighting over the loot at a minimum. So might actually be something worth implementing into an adult game as well, because then people won't fight about how you just got 5 items and I haven't had anything in a while, and so on and so forth. So there's that. I guess that's basically what I have for you right now. Of course, I'll be thinking about things over the week, and if I have anything else I'd like to add, I'll create another of these videos. Until then, thanks for watching. Happy gaming.